Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to the Spiny Dog Management Board. My name is Pat Gear. I am the administrative proxy for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I'll be your chair today. And we're going to be joined by James Boyle, who's the F&P coordinator, and Jason Didden, who is a fisheries management specialist at Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council. The first order of business for today is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or modifications to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved by consent, board consent. Moving on to the proceedings from the October meeting in Beaufort, North Carolina on October 18th. Any modifications, changes, or comments to the proceedings? Hearing none, the proceedings are approved by board consent. Moving on to public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak on items that are not on the agenda today? Do we have anybody listed? Seeing none, is there anybody online the same interested in speaking on items not on the agenda? Okay, hearing none, no comments at all. We're going to move on to item 4, which is a review of the 2023 management track assessment, and that will be done by Jason Didden. Jason, you're online. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, and my presentation is kind of a combination of that and the council actions, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So a quick overview, going to hit a bit of history, some science and policy, ending at the management measures. Next slide, please. These acronyms come up a lot. I'll just note that last one. I think going back and forth between metric tons and pounds can be a bit tricky, but that 450 metric tons being about 1 million pounds, I think is a good quick conversion. Next. So main thing here from federal summaries to highlight the federal quota, the federal trip limit at 7,500 pounds, and that federal waters close to possession when the federal quota is reached. Also, it is a joint plan with New England. The MID took action in December, and New England considers next week. Next slide, please. So just an overview of the specifications where we are now. Key components include the discard set aside, the management uncertainty buffer, which is 0 currently, and that gets us to the current commercial quota of 12 million pounds based on what our SSC had set previously, and then those various deductions. Just history of catch, mostly commercial landings and discards, starting from left to right with the bottom red bars. You can see the expansion of the directed domestic fishery in the 90s, the low landings in the early 2000s as a rebuilding effort, then expanded landings as the stock and quotas grew, and then finally erosion of landings in most recent years. In terms of, the question has come up a few times in different venues of, we're looking at these quota cuts, but we haven't been catching the past quotas, what's going on. So there's a bit of context for that before I talk about a few of the assessment details. In terms of the scale of recent inaccuracy, if you applied the current fishing target rate to what we think the biomass was in 2016, it looks like the 2016 quota was set about 4 times too high. So that will kind of relate to, it relates to questions that have come up of how can we have been having these issues now when we generally haven't been hitting our quotas or catch limits. This is biomass as spawning output. So the Y vertical axis here is millions of pups produced annually. That's the biomass measure for this assessment. This is the exploitation rate. You can see, if you look about 3/4 of the way to the right, around 2000, you can see that reduction in fishing mortality after 2000 with that initial rebuilding effort, but then some overfishing again. But next slide, please. But we do look like we're right at the biomass target, basically, and not overfishing in that terminal year of the management track stock assessment that considered data up through 2022. So from here, I just want to note, and can you hit next one more time? Okay, thanks. So just 2 things to note here. One, the green that I just kind of hand colored in along the year's x-axis are times when we don't think we were overfishing. And then 2, that green horizontal dash is where the research thought the biomass target was, so a good bit higher than we now think our biomass target is. Next. So we have a bit of a double-edged sword of the assessment thinking that there's lower productivity. Like the assessment thinks we're at our target, but then requires lower catches to stay there because of that lower productivity. So you can see in 2022, our ABC was around 17,500 metric tons. Then 2023, just a bit under 8,000 metric tons with, excuse me, the 12 million pound quota, and then potentially lower again now. Okay, so that's a super quick overview of the recent management track assessment. Excuse me, just review a little recent performance. Next slide. So here I'll just highlight, you can see the landings tracked the initial quota, the increase in quota initially in the late 2000s as our biomass is increasing, but then overall declined in the last decade. And I have to bear with me. I'm at the end of a cold, but my voice is deteriorating here. So we'll try to make it through. Next. So this is just prices for the fishery over time. You see inflation adjusted to 2022 dollars. Price has been relatively stable in recent years. This is just fishery performance, the last full fishing year in orange and the current in blue. So week 0 here, all the way to the left is May 1. So you can see 2023 fishing year landings, May through April. 2023 fishing year is a bit behind 2022. And that was just refreshed last week. So the far right of the blue are late December and just early January landings. Just summary of landings by state. Virginia landings have been the strongest the last couple years. And if you look at by season, kind of not surprising, kind of correlates to more landings towards the latter half of the fishing year in recent years. Just recent vessel participation. This is a vessel with any federal permit into some landing categories. We'd work with the AP a number of years ago just to get a general sense of vessel activity. So you can see the kind of follows the general landings trends. It ramps up in the late 2000s with that quota, and then erosion the last decade. So we get a fishery performance report from our advisory panel. They note that a lot of things affect participation in landings in this fishery, and it's relatively low price. So sometimes there are other opportunities, could be oysters or just any other opportunities can draw effort away. They flag they don't really see the big change in abundance trends that the assessment sees, and they really don't. The survey doesn't match the biomass trends that they see, which is they report they see seasonal variability, some annual variability, but not a lot of trends. But they do really note that with the fishery, they really feel like, and this I thought just took this quote from the fishery performance report that they report that they're kind of at a threshold where interest and then fishermen and infrastructure will evaporate. And they've noted that the artificially low quota broke the supply chain from the south, Virginia, the processor in Virginia, or the packer that most of the dogfish are shipped for processing in Massachusetts, but the dealer who was landing exited the fishery. I think that's been replaced to some degree, but it's definitely created some instability and flux there. Next. Other reports from the panel is this, that feel like they're subject to kind of roller coaster style management that's just going to result in shoreside gentrification. A lot of concern about the Bigelow performance issues, whether it's does it run on time, performance of the gear. And they also reviewed the council's research priorities and didn't provide any immediate, they did provide some input on potential research, and that's in the AP report. I'll skip any more detail for now, though. Next. So the council's scientific and statistical committee, they take the assessment, the council's risk policy, and consider how uncertainty assessment is to calculate an ABC. So we've got an analytical assessment that's past peer review. The council's risk policy says that for stock where we think Dogfish is, just above its target, the council's risk policy wants a 54% chance of not overfishing. And then the SSC also considers, is this a low uncertainty assessment, a high uncertainty assessment that affects how much they have to back off the overfishing level to achieve that slightly higher chance of overfishing. And they kind of assess this to be kind of a moderately uncertain stock assessment. Next. And so when you apply the council's risk policy to get that 4% better than coin flip chance of not overfishing, that results in cutting back about 8 or 9% from the overfishing catch. So it's about 663 metric tons in this case. And so the SSC makes those calculations and we get those ABCs, about 7,100 for 2024, 7,300 for 2025, and 7,500 metric tons for 2026. So those are the SSC recommendations that the council cannot exceed. There's some SSC report, I think was included in your briefing materials, have more detail and some backup slides, but that's kind of where the ABCs arise from. Next. So the monitoring committee takes those ABCs and then provides management recommendations to the council. So we've got, I said it's jointly managed. We've got some council staffers, federal staff, state staff, and then this monitoring committee also has 2 non-voting ex officio industry representatives on the monitoring committee also. So the charge in the regs to the monitoring committee is to make recommendations to ensure that the ACLs are not exceeded. Next. So it's really this trade-off between trying to maximize this limited quota that we have available, and then also because this plan has pound for pound paybacks for ACL overages, trying to not exceed that ACL so you don't, potentially overfish, but also not get paybacks that could be disruptive to future fishing years. And so, the monitoring committee has discussed over the years that at these relatively low ABCs, you can't really ensure there's zero risk that you don't have like a big discard estimate. It causes a big ACL overage and really causes future year disruptions because of those potential paybacks. So we've kind of tried to take a good faith effort to avoid substantial overages in a typical year. So Canadian and recreational landings are pretty simple, some small deductions for those. The discards and the management uncertainty, total discards and management uncertainty buffer is really kind of where it is more complicated, and we typically spend more of our time. Next. So this is just spiny dogfish dead discards, total dead discards that we kind of have to try to plan for and set aside. So you can see just above 2,000 metric tons in the terminal year of the assessment, and an overall downward trend the last 10 years, but a lot of that trend is from 13 and 14 being a good bit higher. We tried to get a bit of a sense of early 2023 discards because that informed things. It looks like trawl discards are up a little. We're up a little bit the first half of the year. CAMs could output mid-year discard estimates for us on the commercial side. Gillnet discards maybe down a little bit. Did our mid-season query from MRIP. Recreational discards, first half of the year were up a little bit. The 2 more months were available. I took a look at 23, looks very similar year to date through wave 5 as 2022. So that they look quite comparable when you added in another 2 months of data. So the monitoring committee kind of discussion really ended up hinging on kind of 2 perspectives. One, our industry members really recommended that using that 2022 terminal discard estimate without any management uncertainty buffer. They noted the downward trend. 2022 was pretty close to what we set for 2023. They noted that state landings allocations can't quite probably use all the landings because of the regional allocations. That creates a bit of an implicit buffer. They noted the ABC is increasing. That could soak up any small overages, and really flagged the kind of the critical negative impact from sequestering, setting aside any potential quota. This fishery is kind of on a knife edge of viability. And the industry members of the monitoring committee thought that the options suggested by the rest of the monitoring committee were not reasonable, that we'll talk about next. So the rest of the monitoring committee kind of had some decided that just that 2022 discard estimate with no management uncertainty buffer seemed rather risky. The assessment suggests increasing biomass, which should increase discards. We've seen really low small mesh trawl estimates in the last couple of years. So if that flips, what could happen? Noting that a lot of the discards are in other fisheries, trawl, whose behavior may be variable. So it's just trade-off. Again, higher buffers, less quota now, but lower risk of overages and paybacks in future disruptions, and vice versa with lower buffers now. Next. So we noted that the 3-year average, about 3,100 metric tons, captures some of the recent discard variability. And probably if you were setting that high, you wouldn't need a management uncertainty buffer to avoid substantial overages in most years. You could still get an overage, but at least it accounts for some of that recent variability. But you get a low quota then, even without any additional buffering. And we noted the assessment model also generates expected discards, and thought that seemed like an objective way to set discards. Although then still that the monitoring committee recommended to the Joint Spiny Dogfish Committee, they may want to consider some management uncertainty buffers, given there's still, by the nature of how those discard estimates are calculated in the model, a 50-50 chance that they're higher or lower than projected. So depending on that discard set aside, you get somewhere between about 8.5 to 10.7 million pounds for a quota, and there are tables in the monitoring committee summary. And then lower, that's just from the discard set aside, potentially lower yet again if some management uncertainty buffer is used. We got some additional public comment at the monitoring committee summary, just really concerned about the uncertainty in this and impacts to industry, really flagging that they need as much quota as they can to survive another year. They flagged what they sense as really low sampling and potential impacts of that on the assessment. East Coast provided a letter that should be in your briefing materials. Next, I'll just kind of note some of the input on, just waiting for this slide to come up for the next slide. There we go. And in fact, and this is kind of across a number of fisheries, with this assessment, it also uses some observer data for length information that kind of drives the assessment. We really have had very few portside samples of trips for spiny dogfish in recent years, kind of, I think, largely hinging on, and part of it is fishery activity, but also had a lot of reduction in funding of portside sampling in that last couple of years. Next. So the committee took all that input and they moved to use the most recent estimate of Canadian landings, no management uncertainty buffer, those model projected year-specific discards, 3-year average for recreational landings, and that resulted in those commercial quotas at that bottom bullet, a little over 10 million pounds, going up to about 10.5 million pounds over the course of the 3-year specs, and that's table 3 of the monitoring committee summary. So the council started with that and a motion along those lines, but the Mid-Atlantic Council decided to adopt for 2024 specifications, recommend the 2022 discard amount to start off with, and that's the most recent year available, about 4.7 million pounds, and then slightly more discards in 2025 and 2026. You can see what the commercial quota that results there is, starting about 10.7, then 11, then 11.2 million pounds. And I said the full motion is in the briefing book. The motion might not be, but the council summary, I'm pretty sure it was. So the Mid-Atlantic Council noted the downward trend in discards over the last 10 years, concluding that made it a reasonable proxy for near future discards, but does kind of follow along the assessment's prediction of slightly increasing biomass for 25 and 26, that same kind of trend, and then increases discards slightly for 25 and 26 from that first 4.7 million pound number. And so that's all I have. Happy to take any questions and then turn it back over to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. Does anybody have any questions for Jason this time? Not seeing any. Do we have to have a motion on this? I don't think we need a motion on this assessment. No. If there are no questions, you just move on to the next item. Yeah, we can move on to the set specifications for the next 3 years, and Jason will review the monitoring committee and the Mid-Atlantic Council's recommendations for the 2024 through 2026 fishing seasons.
Sure, and that was kind of integrated into those last few slides. And I think we've had some issues with in the last couple of years in like the council summary rounds to like 1/10 of a million pounds, but provided the exact poundage translation to commission staff.
James has a couple of slides to show at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick slides as you consider the specifications for the next 1 to 3 fishing years. So last year, the Commission maintained the trip limit for the northern region at 7,500 pounds for the 2023-2024 fishing year, which is consistent with the federal trip limit. But because this Commission specified that it was just for the 23-24 fishing year, the Commission would need to re-specify the trip limit for the 2024 to 2025 fishing year or any beyond that. And lastly, if the Commission were to adopt the recommended quotas from the Mid-Atlantic Council, it would result in these regional and state quotas as shown on the table on the slide. I'm happy to leave these up for reference and can take any questions or hand it over to the discussion.
Okay, is there any other discussions or questions? See some people looking. Okay, we're looking for a motion at some point if we have no other questions. Nicola's hand is up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move to a motion if there's no questions. If staff could bring it up to help me make sure I've got the right numbers in, that it will be consistent. Great. So I move to approve FY 2024 to 2026 Spiny Dogfish specifications, commercial quota 2024-2025 to be set at 10,699,021 pounds, 2025 to 2026 to be set at 10,972,394 pounds, 2026 to 2027 to be set at 11,223,720 pounds, consistent with those adopted by the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council, pending their approval by NOAA Fisheries. And if I have a second to the motion, I'll speak to it as well, Mr. Chair.
Do we have a second to that motion? Yeah, Jeff. I see Jeff's hand come up. Nicola, do you have any anything you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I took the time last night to re-listen to the Mid-Atlantic Council discussion on this item, and that really helped me to support the outcome that the council arrived at in December. It was reached after a thorough council discussion of a range of options that included several beyond what the committee had evaluated. That discussion highlighted for me a widespread desire to support the continuation of the dogfish fishery with the highest quotas as justifiable. However, it was also apparent that NOAA Fisheries was unlikely to approve specifications that used the 2022 discard estimate as was also considered as the discard deduction for the coming 3 years, that doing so would be too similar to cherry picking the discard estimate to get the quota we want rather than a scientifically valid approach. But sufficient rationale was, I think, provided for these numbers that use the 10-year declining trend of discard estimates to support the application of the 2022 discard estimate for 2024, and then use the stock assessments projections to follow a gradual increasing trend of discards. I'm aware that the New England Council is meeting next week, and it's possible that a different outcome could be arrived at, and that the final decision would rest with NOAA Fisheries. Hence that additional language about pending NOAA Fisheries approval within the motion. I don't favor postponing our action to await for those decisions. That would essentially be giving up this board's opportunity to influence the outcome. So that therein lies the rationale for my making this motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. Jeff, do you have anything to add to that?
My only question is, should this motion include the possession limits for 24 and 25 also, or do you want that as a separate motion?
You could do it separately, or we can include it in this motion if you want.
May as well go in this one, it seems to me, maybe.
Okay.
If it's not too late.
All right, Nicola, do you want to modify the motion to include the trip limits?
I don't know, Mr. Chair. I had considered that myself. I wasn't sure if there was going to be a different opinion on the quotas in this meeting. These specifications are also for 3 years, whereas I think I feel more comfortable setting the trip limit for just 1 year at this time. So for those reasons, I had not included it.
That's fine with me.
I'd recommend we do it as a separate motion. Okay. Is there any questions or any discussion on this motion? Mike Luisi?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I supported this as a member of the Mid-Atlantic Council, and there was a lot of discussion at the time about what NOAA Fisheries what the regional office was going to do based on the recommendations from the MID. And Nicola also mentioned that the New England Council is going to be meeting on this same topic, and they may come up with something entirely different from what we did. So I guess my question is, if we were to support this and this moved forward, and the New England Council comes up with something different, or even the same as the Mid-Atlantic Council, yet NOAA Fisheries decides to implement something different, does that put the states and the federal waters, does it make the quotas different? I know it says at the end of this motion, pending NOAA's approval, but what approval is it pending? They're going to make a decision at some point. It's what decision they make that affects whether or not our state and federal waters have the same limits or not. Because I think maintaining those limits, quotas the same in both federal and state waters is extremely important. We don't want to start to go in two different paths here. So I'm just looking for some clarification on
Bob may have some clarification on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. I think, Nicola can speak for herself, obviously, as the maker of the motion, but my interpretation of this is that if the board were to approve this, our measures are essentially what's on the screen. And if NOAA ultimately approves something different based on guidance from the Mid-Atlantic Council or just action on their own, this board would have to get back together and revisit the state quotas to make them consistent with the federal government. And that would take a 2/3 vote to do that. But I think, Mike, your last point is probably the most important, which is, having the states and the federal government on the same page as far as quotas go is pretty important. We've shown that in Dogfish a couple times, actually, that, if there are different quotas at the state and federal level, it gets really messy really quickly.
Mike, follow up?
Yeah, so Bob, you're not the right person to answer this question, but as far as timing goes, and for NOAA, what would the timing be? What's the intended timeline for the establishment of making this decision and publishing that rule? Do you know, Allie?
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. It's a little hard for me to say at this point because, as was noted earlier, the New England Council hasn't taken action yet. And I imagine Mid-Atlantic Council staff, if different action were taken next week, would have to write that up. And so I think that would be dependent on when the document is submitted to us for us to start our rulemaking decisional process there. So unfortunately, I can't speak specifically to that.
Yeah, Jason, with some of the assessment delays, we're backed up a bit compared to sometimes. So it's going to be tight to get things in before the start of the fishing year. That's going to be our goal. But from the federal side, there's rollover. So if things aren't quite ready exactly by May 1, existing measures roll over until superseded.
Nicola Meserve has her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to disagree with Bob, but when I was thinking about this motion and the language of pending their approval by NOAA Fisheries, my intent was that essentially if NOAA Fisheries adopted something else, the commission, this board, this motion would be kind of invalidated, and the commission wouldn't have any quotas like on the books, and so it would just be a simple majority vote at that time to adopt specifications, which I would hope could be done by probably a board email ballot, given the late nature that may be at that time. And so I'd look to Bob to see if that's an okay interpretation as well.
Any other comments on this motion? Bob?
Yeah, just to follow up on Nicola's question, if that's her intent, is that, should NOAA Fisheries implement something different, then the commission does not have any measures for these years on the books at all, and then the board can get back together and approve something through simple majority. That's fine. I think just the record just needs to reflect and as I said, it's Nicola's emotion. So if that's her interpretation or her intent of the motion, is if NOAA does something different than the numbers that are included on the screen now, then there are no state measures, and this commission will have to get back together. This board will have to get back together and take action to do that. So that's absolutely fine. I just wanted to it's just good to have it clear on the record.
Mike, Luisi?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming back to me. I think that's a really important point. The intent of the motion, and if you want to make sure it's clear, I agree with Nicola. I think that unless NOAA Fisheries approves the same quotas that are listed above, if they don't, then we need to revisit. But if they do, then we can move forward. I'd be happy to either offer advice as to a friendly, or I could make a motion to amend and add a little language at the end that would hopefully clarify that for everyone. It's up to you.
Mike, the record shows, so it shouldn't be necessary. Is there any other discussion on this motion? Not hearing any. I guess it's time for a vote. Since this is a final, before we take the vote, I would like to have public comment. If there's anybody who'd like to speak to this motion. We have one online. Please state your name.
Hi, Attorney John Whiteside. I'm on the AP and Monitoring Committee. I was at the Mid-Atlantic meeting on December 13th, and I would just urge the Commission to follow the same vote for what the motion is that's on the board now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, since this is a final motion, I'd like to see list of hands in favor of this motion. Please raise your hand if you're in favor. Raise your hand if you're opposed. Seeing none. Null votes, abstentions, one from NOAA Fisheries. And I believe the final vote on that is 12 to 11 to 0 to 0 to 1. And I did not read the motion in. You want me to read it? You sure? Okay. All right, that passes. Now we need to address the trip limits. And I'll look for Jeff or Mike. Mike Luisi has his hand up, but I think Jeff, you're playing volleyball back and forth with each other right now.
All right, I move to approve 2024-2025 Spiny Dogfish trip limits at 7,500 pounds. I think that's the right number.
Hey, do I have a second for that? Doug Grout? Jeff, do you want to comment on that at all?
I'm glad I don't have to pull them all in. I'll tell you, I've done 6,000 and 7,500 is a lot of fish, but no, I don't have any other comment.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Grout, no. We have that up there. So the motion was by Jeff Kalin, seconded by Doug Grout. Now, do we need to do the same for the southern region? No, okay.
The southern states set their own trip limits to match. They can set their measures however they deem necessary as long as they don't exceed their quotas.
We have Jeff Kalen. Jeff Kalen was the motioner and Doug Rout was the second.
Thank you for clarifying the motion, Tony.
Okay, we have that up there. Is there any other discussion on this? Nicola, you have a comment?
A question for the motion, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to check if this is setting the trip limit for 1 year or 2. I see fishing seasons and seeing FY 2024 to 2025. You know, it's a little bit unclear to me if this is 1 year or 2. So just the one year was my hopefully the proper interpretation. Thanks.
Mr. Kalen, you want to clarify that?
I wanted it to be for 2 years, so it should be 2024 to 2026, I think.
Jeff, we cannot, you need to speak into a microphone in order to be recorded. Are you, it doesn't seem like it's picking you up. If you could bring the microphone close to your face, that would be very helpful.
How's that?
Much better, thank you.
Sorry. So the intent was for 2 years, not 1 year.
So then we need to say fishing year. So move to approve fishing years 2024 to 2025 and 2025 to 2026.
Mr. Kalen, does that meet with what your intent of the motion?
It is, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And Mr. Grout, are you okay with that? Okay. Are there any other comments or discussion? Okay, Nicola's hand is up again. Nicola?
I apologize, that was left over.
Chris Savage?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for the motion maker and seconder. So you're okay with just setting the specification, the trip limits for 2 years, but we just set specifications for 3 years. Just wondering if that was your intent, just do 2 years for the trip limits, even though we just did 3 years for the specifications. Just trying to understand. Thanks.
I was just trying to follow along with the presentation. I thought we could only do it for 2 years. Is that a misunderstanding, or should we add the 3rd year?
I believe we can do it for all 3 if we want. I think we can.
That we should do that. I thought we could only do it for 2. I thought that's what I read earlier, but we'll add a 3rd year if that's okay to match the specification period. That's a good point, Chris, but we can do 3. Let's do 3.
You're the maker of this motion. If you want to change it.
I do want to change it if we can.
Do we have to ask a alternative motion since it's already 7,500 pounds?
That looks good.
That meets with your approval? Is that okay? All right.
Okay.
James just let me know we could have done up to 5 years. And Mr. Grout, you're okay with this as well? Okay. Okay. Jeff, we've changed it so much, I'm going to ask you to read it out again.
Of course, Mr. Chairman. I move to approve the Northern Region trip limit for spiny dogfish fishing years 2024, 25, 2025, 26, and 2026, 27 at 7,500 pounds. I think we need to add spiny dogfish to what's written there. Move to approve the spiny dogfish northern trip region limit. That looks good to me.
We've got it. Mr. Grout, you're okay with this? All right, thumbs up. All right. Is there any opposition to this motion? Yes?
If no fisheries could please abstain. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So hearing no objection, this motion is passed by the board by unanimous consent with 1 abstention from no fisheries. Okay. And I apologize, Jeff, probably what I should have done was up front. I should have asked you if you wanted to do 1, 2, or 3 years, and we could have saved ourselves.
I should have let Luisi go.
15 minutes of doing this. So moving on to the next item is election of a vice chair. And I'm looking for a motion on Mr. Beth Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to nominate Joe Cimino as vice chair of the Spiny Dogfish Management Board.
All right. Do I have a second to that motion? Mr. Luisi? Hearing any discussion on the motion? Having none, the motion passes unanimously. Joe, congratulations and thank you for your service. I have Nicola's hand is back up again. So Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations, Joe. I wanted to check in with staff as to the status of quota rollovers now that the stock is above its biomass target. Addendum 3 authorizes 5% of unused state or regional quotas to be rolled over. So is it implicit in the prior motions that the state and regional quotas may be adjusted for FY 2024 based on that quota rollover? Thank you.
You got this. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so with the stock status, the way it is, the 5% rollover is allowed for the next fishing year. Given in the past, it looks like this was done kind of automatically with a preliminary quota memo being sent out in May. Given the kind of fine margin between perhaps potential landings and the quotas, the potential quotas, given the way they are, it would be more prudent to send out a preliminary quota memo with rollovers in October when landings from the previous fishing year have a bit more time to be closer to finalized. So that seems to be the process that would work best for us and for states to let us know ahead of time that they want to do it, so we can do it on a state by state or region basis instead of doing it for the whole coast or every state that's possible automatically.
Tony.
And just to point out that because we are at such close margins with this quota, one thing that the board should take into consideration is that we will have a different quota. States will have a different quota than that of NOAA fisheries. Our quota will be higher than theirs. If the full coastwide quota is projected to be reached, NOAA will close, and it could close before a state has harvested all of its quota. So that would potentially disadvantage a person that has a federal permit holder if our quotas are higher than others, than the feds.
Any other discussion on that item? Nicola?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What Tony has just pointed out, the potential mismatch, it occurs to me that there was a similar concern recently regarding black sea bass commercial quotas and how a state's potential overage of a state-specific quota could have the same impact in terms of impacting another state that their fisheries later in the season and the federal closure occurring to curtail their fishery before the state quota is reached, and that there is a soon to be approved, I believe, change to the rules there that would have the federal in-season closure trigger for black sea bass occurring when landings are at 105% of the coastwide quota. So that may just food for thought for now, but I think that may be a tool that we might want to think about using for spiny dogfish or trying to pursue for spiny dogfish in the future. If we maintain a biomass above a target that will continue to provide for different coastwide quotas between the ASMFC and the federal perspective of that. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. Any comments or discussion on what Nicola just spoke about? Just something to consider for the future. Is there anything else to come before this board today? Any other business? All right, hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.